Hi guys, my name is Karthik and I am from executeautomation.com, and today in this video we'll be talking about getting started with API testing using RestSharp in Visual Studio 2022 17.4 edition and also in .NET 7 with C# 11. So you can see that all these versions that I'm talking about are quite new, like released like 5 or 6 days before. And the most important thing that we are going to be discussing in this particular video is Visual Studio 17.4 of 2022 edition is a fully native ARM supporting edition, which means you can run this Visual Studio 2022 directly natively supported version of Windows 11 operating system ARM. I mean, you can run that in the x64 edition of Windows as well, but if you have Windows 11 ARM edition, you can run that as well. And once again, the .NET 7, as I was talking about right now, this is also a fully ARM native supported edition. Like .NET 6, of course, it runs in the ARM edition, but the .NET 7 is the actual fully natively supported version of .NET as well. So we'll be discussing all these things in this particular video. And the most important thing is, you can see in my screen at the moment, I'm running an Apple M1 Silicon chip, which is an ARM edition, and we are going to run a Windows 11 ARM edition in this particular machine in the Parallels desktop software. And it's pretty much like an emulation or like a virtual machine. And from that, we are going to run the Windows 11, and on the top, we're going to be running the Visual Studio. I mean, inside, we're going to be running Visual Studio. So let's see all these things in this particular video in action. Apart from that, we are going to be doing an API testing. So the first thing which I was talking about is the Windows 11. So let me just start the Windows 11 so that you can see it is going to be booted up completely in my Mac operating system over here. And you can see that the Windows 11 is currently over here, which is great. And if you don't believe me, I just can show you what edition of the Windows 11 is this. So if I go to the task manager and if I go to the performance, you can see that it is running the Apple Silicon, and it has a 3.2 gigahertz of the CPU and just 6 gig of memory. Yeah, it's quite low at the moment, but my Mac is actually of 16 gig. But you can see that I'm going to be using this slower virtual machine to actually run the whole Visual Studio and develop the code. So the first thing is, if I just show you the Visual Studio, I've already installed the Visual Studio 2022 17.4. So this is the natively supported ARM version Visual Studio, so I can just run that. And over here, I'm going to start creating the project. So the first thing is, I'm going to clone a repository, and the repository which I'm going to be cloning is for the API testing is going to be from our GitHub of Execute Automation. So if I just go GitHub Execute Automation, and let me go choose the GraphQL.net. So this is one of the projects which I have been using for many of my API testing courses, including the API testing with the framework development in RestSharp, my Udemy course. So if you wanted to learn more about the complete end-to-end journey of the API testing, including running the containers and writing a builder pattern kind of code, you can go ahead and learn from that particular course. But at the moment, I'm just going to use the same code, which is going to be running over here within our code base as well. So you can see that it's going to tell you that I already have the GraphQL.net repo directory. So I'm just going to say GraphQL demo, something like that. And I'm going to create the folder, and that's going to clone the whole code for me behind the scene from the GitHub. And it's also going to start bringing up that code for me over here, which is great. So you can see that it's quite faster, right? We already have Visual Studio 2022 17.4, which is natively running within the ARM operating system. It looks pretty much like I'm running a Windows operating system. I don't even think that I'm running inside a Mac operating system by running in like a virtual machine of Windows and running the .NET here. I mean, the Visual Studio here with .NET 17, I mean .NET 7, something like that. It's looking quite straightforward, right? All right. So as I told you, this particular code base, at least it is actually written using .NET 6. But if we run the test code, it is going to be running in the .NET 7. So I'm just going to run this particular test in the, I'm going to run this application in the local dev. So let me go click this local dev. So you can see that it is going to build the project. And it's going to ask you that whether do you want to thrust this particular application with the SSL certificate. I'm just going to say no for now, and there is a reason for that. And let's go over here, let the browser to load. And you can see that currently it's throwing me an error here. It says that unable to configure the HTTPS endpoint because there is no certificate, so that it can't really run on this particular machine. So this is one thing that is going to happen if you say no while you run this particular application. So make sure that you always say yes. If not, you are going to be doing the exact same thing from the command line. So you can see that you need to run this .NET dev-certs HTTPS to make your code to run on the HTTPS certificate. If not, the code is not going to run. So what I'm going to do is, I can do this test execution in two ways. One is I can go to my code over here, and let's say in the properties, there is this launch settings.json file where I have specified HTTPS over here. So I can just remove this HTTPS to just HTTP to make this particular code, at least for the local development, to run in the HTTP, like a non-secured website like that. And you can see that my site is gonna eventually load up. Pretty cool, right? So now that I have my application, and if I just see that this particular site requires the authentication, if not, this code is not gonna work. So if I just go get the product by ID, like putting by 1, and then if I execute, you will notice that it is going to tell you that this particular API requires an authentication, and there is an unauthorized error. So we really require some authentication there. So I'm going to do an authorize. Oops, before that, I'm going to do a post for the authentication. So I'm going to say KK, and the password is 123456. And if I hit execute, you'll see that we get a token here. So I'm going to copy this particular token, and I'm going to authorize. I'm going to say bearer and put this token. So now we have this guy. And now if I go all the way back to this particular get product by ID of 1, and you will notice that I get the product. So pretty straightforward, right? This is the very usual thing that we do in an organization to authenticate ourselves and also do the API call using Swagger documentation. So Swagger documentation is going to be something embedded already within our application most of the time. If you use .NET or any other toolings, Swagger is like a part of the API documentation. So you also have a swagger.json file which tells you the definition or the schema definition of how this particular API is going to look like. Well, that's about this particular application itself. And now we're going to test this particular application. We'll see how I could able to do the same get product by ID of 1 that I'm seeing over here. If I do that, I get a name of keyboard here, and I get some details about this component, something like that. So how do I actually automate this whole thing? That's the challenge, and that's what we are going to be doing this particular video using C# 11 and .NET 7 and all this new cool stuff. So let's see how we can do that. So let me do this. And you may ask this question like, you know what, Karthik, you told us that this is just like .NET 6 and how this is running super natively in the ARM edition. As I told you, .NET 6 is also a ARM supported edition, but not natively supported. But now with .NET 6.7 onwards, you have a native support of the .NET running in the ARM edition, especially Windows 11, Mac OS, and also the Linux operating system. So it's a cross-platform like tooling and framework, and you can also run this in all the different versions of the ARM editions of the operating systems. Cool. So now we are going to start writing the test. Let's not worry about the application itself too much. And I'm going to first do an add over here in my solution. I'm going to add a new project, and I'm going to start creating a test project. So the test project is going to be the XUnit test project. I'm going to cover a lot of details in here in this code, but those details are very much detailedly covered in my API testing course in Udemy. So go ahead and watch there. But at the moment over here, I'm just going to cover some of the crisp of what this whole code is going to be looking like while we do the API testing. So the first thing is I'm going to choose the XUnit test project. I'm going to say API testing with RestSharp, something like that, demo. And this is the repo. I'm not going to put inside this particular project or something like that. I'm not going to make all those things just for the simplicity purpose. And you can see that the .NET 7 comes with a standard term support, whereas the .NET 6 is a long-term support. So that's the reason why a lot of people won't even migrate towards .NET 7 most of the time. But yeah, .NET 7 is cool. So I'm gonna choose the .NET 7 and I'm gonna hit create. So that's where I'm gonna create a new project. It's gonna add within this particular solution. You can see that it is actually very faster because this Visual Studio 2022 17.4 natively runs on an ARM edition. That's the reason why it's very fast. I've also tried Visual Studio, which is not natively supported in the ARM, and it is dead slow. Seriously, it just breaks sometimes. But this is very faster. Cool. So now that you can see that the project is created over here, and I'm going to start writing the test. That's the whole intention over here. But before that, we're going to first add the dependency for the RestSharp really. So I'm going to go for the browse, and then I'm going to search RestSharp. It's cool coming up, and the RestSharp is over here. I'm going to install the 108.02 edition. I think this is the latest edition the day I'm recording this particular video. And then we also need to have the fluent assertion. I really like that assertion part. So I'm going to search that. I think these are the two things which I really require for this particular demo. And now I can start writing the code pretty much like how I can write like a super simple RestSharp code over here. So the first thing about our RestSharp code is that we need to instantiate a REST client, and then we also need to perform a post operation on the authentication. So that's what we need to do. And once we do the post, we also need to deserialize the value because it has authentication in it, token in it. So deserialize the token. That's what we need to do, the third part. And once we do the deserialization, we also need to take that token and then place it in the header of the get request that I'm going to do for getting the product, right? I really require to place the token in the header, and then I also need to call the API, call the get API, and get the response. And finally, we're going to do the assertion to verify if that's what we're looking for. So these are the things that we are going to be doing in this particular video. So it'll be really fun. You will notice that there are so many things that you can learn in this particular video. So the first thing, as I told you, is going to be the REST client that we need to be really worried about. So REST client, as I told you, it's available within the RestSharp. So let's do that. So first, var of the REST client is equal to new. So you can see that now I'm gonna actually call my REST client, which is nothing but the RestSharp's REST client itself. So this is the place where I'm actually gonna call my REST client or create an instance of the REST client. And within this REST client, you actually notice that there are so many things that you can do. You can call the dot over here. I think there is something called as the get method, which is going to perform the get operation, and similarly there is a post method which is going to perform the post operation. And there is also a way that you can pass in the type, the deserialization type, so that you can deserialize the response to whatever type that you're passing in, so that all those things that you can do over here. Similarly, you can do the post JSON as async, and so yeah, you can do all sort of things over here. So let's do that. So REST client dot, I'm gonna do a post operation. So why not just cut this particular code and let's go step by step over here. Post, within this post, I'm actually gonna be just gonna call a post operation for the API, which is gonna be, which I don't know exactly. I think if we just go back to our code here, and probably, you know what, we can run this particular application in a command line and then cd of this particular folder, and I'm gonna say .NET run. So this way it is gonna run the application for me completely, and then we can keep playing around from there. So we don't really require Visual Studio for doing that. So this is like a separate thread which is gonna keep running our application. Cool. So the application is right now up and running. So now I can go here to the local host of 5001, and you see that the URL of the application, the API endpoint that I need to call is basically the /API/authenticate/login. So that is what I need to be calling basically. So I'm gonna do that over here. So I'm gonna do a slash of this. That is gonna be the post. But you will notice that once I do the post, it is saying that I need to actually call what is called as a REST request, but not like a string. So basically this post operation that you can see over here, if I just do go to the implementation of this particular post, you will notice that the post actually requires this of the client. I mean, the client that you're talking about, this is the extension method. And then it requires you the REST request type to be passed. It is not like you can directly get, you can directly pass something like a string of the path. Rather, you need to pass the REST request itself. So in order to do that, we actually need to do this. We are actually going to do a new of REST request, and then I can pass this guy over here, something like this. So that way it is valid right now, right? So that's going to perform a post for me. I can then do a var of the token that I'm looking for. I'm going to paste it over here, and then I'm going to probably deserialize that to the token, or maybe I can just say the auth response, and then we can deserialize the actual token itself to see what is the token value and things of that nature. So I could be able to do all those things later on. But most importantly, you can see that we have called the REST client, but we have not actually called our actual application's URL itself. So this is like an relative URL, but the actual URL of the application is not been defined yet. So that we can do two ways. One is you can do within the REST client itself. You can just do new of the REST client option, where on this particular REST client option, you can just pass the base URL, where you can pass the URL itself. So the base URL is going to be URI. So new URI, where I guess we have removed the HTTP, the S from there. So it's going to be 5001, and we don't really require a slash because we're using the slash for all the endpoints there. So I'm just going to leave this as it is. So that's the actual base URL that we need to pass in. So now we have a base URL, we have a relative URL, and we also might be getting the response there if everything is correct. And then we need to get the actual what is called as the token. So I'm gonna say token is equal to the auth response. So basically for this particular type of this auth response that we're talking over here, we actually need to somehow deserialize this particular value. So now that we are going to perform this post operation over here with the REST request, I mean, we could able to do that over here like this. But if you remember, within our code over here for the login operation, we also need to pass what is called as this body, right? So without this body, we couldn't able to actually, I mean, we cannot really actually able to perform the operation of getting the value itself. So the best way of doing it is to actually cut this code from this post over here, and I'm gonna say var auth request, and within this auth request I'm also going to add a body. So that body is going to be very simple. I mean, there are two ways that we could able to do this. One is I can just add the body here, and then there is something called as an object over here where I can pass things pretty much like from the C# .NET way. I mean, if you remember in C# 11, there is something called as the raw string literals. So you can actually pass the raw string literals to pass the whole JSON value itself. So I can just do something like this over here. You understand what I'm really doing here once you get to know about this particular syntax. And something like this over here, and in this particular place that you are seeing over here, this is basically like a raw string literals. Over here I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna copy this particular JSON value, and then I'm gonna paste it over here. As I told you, this is one of the C# 11 feature, so this is not something which was there before. even in C#10. And let me do this, just a bit of formatting. So let's say format document. Is it even formatting? Yeah, I don't think it's formatting. But you will notice that this particular alignment can be moved even in a better way, actually. Probably like var the auth body, something like this, just for the readability purpose, really. Like that. And I'm gonna remove the spaces. Yeah, so you can see that now it is even more aligned, and I can then pass this particular auth body here, and I can also say what is the content type. Really, it's going to be a so do you have a data format there? Yeah, the data format dot, I think it's a JSON, so we can do that. And instead of even the add body, probably I'm gonna do like add, there is something called a string body, so that is even better because now this is a string value, so I can just use the add string body to make it even more simpler. So once I have this particular auth request, I can then pass this auth request over here within the post, and you will notice that now we have a auth request, and then we have auth body, and this body is being passed over here as a string body with a JSON type, and now we have the post operation, which is going to perform the post operation for me, which is cool. So now that you can see that now we have an auth response coming up after fully deserialized. So let's put a breakpoint over here, and now let's try to run this particular code and see what is even basically going to happen. So if I just try to debug this particular code, if everything is quite correctly wired up, you will notice that we should able to perform an post operation there, which is going to be this one. Looks like we have performed a good post operation there. There we go. We have a token coming up. See that? We have a successful token, which you can view over here, right? So now we have a token, which means it is quite right now. And now I can do a parsing operation to get the token out, and then I can pass it as the header, and I can perform a get operation for the product itself. So let's see how can I do that. So for that particular operation, I'm just gonna remove this comment over here, and I'm gonna say, yeah, I was just thinking to get this whole thing directly. So response dot content, so because that is the content that I'm actually going to be interested in, probably I can do something like a JObject dot parse, where I'm gonna parse this particular auth response completely, and we'll see what is going to be the content, and then we can just get the probably the value out of it. So let's see how it's going to look like. I don't know whether this code is going to work, but I'm going to put a breakpoint there. So we'll put a debugger so that we can see what is going to be the auth response content and what is going to be its value and how we're going to get the particular value out. So let's see how it's going to look like. So we know that the parsing is working. So if I see the content there, so the content is this one, and there is this value. Let's see what is the value it's going to look like. Oh shit, it's not working. So probably you know what to do. We don't have to do this value kind of things over here. We can just parse this, and we can get the token out of it, which is going to be the token, sorry, content, and then the token. And now if I try debugging it this time, hopefully it is going to get the token out for me. There we go. So now I have a token, which I can then pass it for my value over there, which is great. So the rest of things are going to be quite straightforward, like what I have did here. So same thing, like we're going to have a REST request, and then there is going to be a string body. We're going to be doing the whole things over there. So instead of me writing the same code again and again, because I have already written the particular piece of code, I'm going to copy this whole code, and I'm going to paste it over here, and I will show you how it is going to look like, including the assertion part, just this one. So you can see that we're going to perform a REST request once again for the product, but you will notice that I'm going to be passing in the first product, and then I'm passing in the header for the token value, and then I'm going to perform a get operation, but this time I'm actually getting it from a product type. So now I have to create a product type so that I can actually deserialize that particular value, and I can do it from here. So that the deserialization part is going to be quite interesting if you probably see how it's going to look like. So if I just go over here, let me also create that for you. Let me just add a data, and over here I'm going to add a class. I'm going to call this as product, and in this particular product I'm actually going to not really add like a class type, but I'm going to use a record type for this particular product, and I'm going to paste it over here. So you can see that I've actually created like a small record type where it is going to have a product, and this record type actually includes another record type which is going to be called as component. So let me also add that particular class. I'm going to copy that, I'm going to paste it over here. So now that you can see that it has a component, it also has a product over there, and similarly you will notice that the errors are gone, which is great. And now if I just go to my unit test one over here, and if I hit control dot, you will notice that I get the particular usings there. So I'm going to add the particular using, so I get the product basically. So what is going to basically happen is we have a product types for the actual application itself over here. I have created like a whole model as a record type, and also for the component. And once I have all these details, I can then deserialize the response coming from the product into this product type, so that I can do a strongly type there. And I'm also using the fluent assertion to do the assertion part to verify if the first value that I'm getting is actually a keyboard value or not. So let's try to run this whole code and see how this is going to basically work. So if I just try running this particular code, you will notice that the whole test is going to run, and eventually it is going to pass. There we go. So it took like 1.4 seconds because this machine is a bit slower, but if you try running it in a better machine, it's not going to take even a millisecond or something like that. So it is going to be 593 millisecond. You can see that it is fast in the same machine. So yeah, this is how we could able to write a super simple API test code with RestSharp. Now, once again, as I told you, this code is just a starting, but if you go to my Udemy API testing RestSharp like that, so you can see that we have this course called as API testing with RestSharp. So you can learn a lot more detail about how you can develop the full better way to write the same API test code in a more advanced fashion, and also how you can actually write in a builder pattern, and then how you can run using the web application factory. Instead of having this application up and running like this, you can also run the application in memory along with the database and stuff. And then also you can see, you can run, how you can test the GraphQL using C#.NET, also how you do the contract testing and service visualization using Mountebank, snapshot testings. And there are a lot of things that you can learn from this particular course. Yeah, this course actually gives you a lot of information apart from the API testing. But yeah, this is about how you can do the API testing. Once again, as I told you, I have not really talked a lot of detail about the C#'s 11 feature here, other than the string literals over here. But we touched base a bit about the record types. And also, you know what, we can also see that most of the code that you are seeing here is actually can be moved to the global usings, which means I can cut this particular code from here, the usings from here, and then I can move it to the global usings. So I can just do like global here, so that I don't even require to add this in all the class files. So every time I keep moving it, other class files don't even require these kind of things. I can just try to move them all out, because those are not even required anymore, because those are all now sitting in the global usings. So I could do that. And similarly for the namespace, you can see that if I just hit control dot here, I can use the file scoped namespace. So that reduces the number of lines over here, because there are no more braces there. So I can just convert it to file scope namespace. I can do the exact same thing for the unit test as well over here. And similarly, you can see that we have already reduced this code, by the way, but because we're just directly using the types there. But this whole code can be even further stringed a lot more using the better coding practices and patterns that we can use to make it more like a framework so that we can reuse it across our test codes. So that's it, guys. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. And once again, as I told you, this particular code is running in an ARM based operating system, and it doesn't really feel like it is running in an ARM machine. It looks pretty much like it's running in an x64-bit operating system. So once again, thank you so much for watching this video. You guys have a great day.